Hello, my name is Stacy Bright. I'm a QA and trainer with ViaQuest Psychiatric and Behavioral Solutions. Today, we're going to be talking about supporting adults with autism spectrum disorder. Our objectives today are to learn what autism spectrum disorder is and how it can impact one's everyday life, to learn how an autism diagnosis can affect adults on the spectrum. We'll discuss the levels in an autism diagnosis and what that means. We will clarify some myths and facts about autism and those on the spectrum. And we will also learn about autistic traits to recognize them in the clients we serve. We'll be talking about triggers and their effect on someone with ASD, as well as learn what sensory sensitivity is and how it impacts one with autism. And we will learn ways to be supportive of adults on the spectrum. Autism spectrum disorder is a neurological and developmental disorder. It is considered a developmental disorder because symptoms generally appear within the first 2 years of life. The term spectrum refers to the wide variations of symptoms, skills, and levels of impairment that people with ASD can have that affect their ability to function in school, work, and other areas of life. Released in May of 2013, the fifth and most recent edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the DSM-5, is used by medical and mental health professionals to diagnose mental health and developmental disorders. The DSM-5 diagnosis is autism spectrum disorder, and it encompasses autism or autistic disorder, Asperger's disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. The DSM-5 outlines diagnostic criteria based on functioning in two domains: social communication and interactions, and restricted repetitive interest behaviors or activities. Social communication and interactions are a very real struggle for those on the spectrum. From just starting a conversation with someone by saying hi to having that natural back and forth flow of a conversation can be very difficult. They may have challenges with making eye contact or having awkward body language, or their body language doesn't match what they are saying or doing, as well as a total lack of facial expressions. People on the spectrum can have a hard time forming friendships or other types of relationships, or they may show no interest in forming any relationships at all. Restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, and activities refers to those behaviors like hand flapping, lining things up, or rocking. Changes in schedules or routine can be very distressful for someone with ASD. They have a need for things to be the same. Maybe they eat the same thing for lunch on specific days, or they take the same route when going somewhere that they've been going to regularly. Hyper or hyposensitive to sounds, textures, or smells. Next, we're going to watch a short video about an autism diagnosis in adults.
We've been talking with Wanda, who says her autism diagnosis at the age of 46 changed her life. Joining us now is the Karma Zinn and Lillard Chair in Adult Autism and Associate Professor at Rutgers University, Dr. Vanessa Ball. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ball.
Hey, Dr. Ball, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Ball, let's dive right in. How common is it for people to find out that they are autistic or have autistic spectrum disorder later in life?
It's more common than it was 20 or 30 years ago, but we really don't have great statistics on how many adults are getting identified later in life. We have people who self-refer when their own child has been diagnosed, like Wanda. We have high-profile cases in the media, like Elon Musk, Hannah Gadsby, and that's, I think, triggering not only very public self-disclosures on their part, but other community members to disclose their diagnosis. So we're seeing a lot more coverage in the media and on social media. But I think, even though we don't have numbers, even if we did, I'd be really worried that that would be an underestimate because there's not enough providers out there that provide, autism diagnoses or have expertise in autism in adulthood. So I worry that there are probably people out there who are sitting on really long wait lists or who aren't even able to access that service.
Is autism on the rise, or is it just being more commonly diagnosed, and were we underdiagnosing in the past, which could explain why more adults are coming forward and getting the diagnosis later in life? What do you think?
I think now we have several decades of research where we just know a lot more about autism, especially in the first years of life, which helps us to diagnose earlier in childhood. It's also, helped us to get to know more about individuals who do not have obvious delays in developmental milestones. So they may have average or even superior IQs. They have good language skills. And 30 or more years ago, we weren't recognizing autism in kids with those kinds of strengths.
That brings up the question, Dr. Ball, what are some signs that you may be an undiagnosed autistic adult? What to look for?
Difficulty reading other people's nonverbal cues. So these are things like facial expressions, eye contact, even tone of voice. And if you have difficulty reading those in real time during an interaction, it can be really hard to navigate conversations and social situations and to respond appropriately. And I think a lot of autistic adults also talk about realizing in the moment, wow, this interaction doesn't seem to be going so well, but I don't know why, right? And really struggling to figure out, okay, what should I do to respond? Another really common thing is adults often talk about feeling different for much of their life and having a lot of difficulty making friends or keeping other kinds of relationships going.
We've been talking.
Autism wasn't an actual diagnosis until the 1980s, and even then it wasn't the same as the diagnosis and criteria that we have today. That's part of the reason why many older adults have been misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all. For those adults who are diagnosed at a young age and grew up with a diagnosis, they probably had treatment and support during the big transition periods of their lives, like starting school, adolescence, adulthood, starting a career. But there are just as many who are never formally diagnosed or not diagnosed until well into adulthood. Then that begs the question, how did they get through life without a diagnosis or anyone noticing? Social situations can be uncomfortable for someone on the spectrum, and for that reason, some have learned to camouflage or mask their symptoms. Camouflaging is when they have learned to copy social behaviors of the people around them. Masking is when their autistic traits or features are kept hidden during interactions. These strategies are used to help them try to blend in, to behave like those around them. Struggles with communication can be especially challenging. Imagine what it would be like not to be able to tell somebody what you want or need. How frustrating might that be? Trying to read or understand those unwritten social cues and rules that we all inherently learn as we grow up, go to school, interact with peers, that can be a real problem at times. And there could be anxiety around communicating with others, some who may have difficulty putting their wants or needs into words. Someone in an LTC facility may be known as picky because she's picky about what she eats, or she's difficult to work with because she gets mad when her food is touching on her plate. What if it's not just being picky or difficult, though, and those challenging behaviors are, in fact, autism symptoms? Adults can spend years not recognizing that some of the problems or feelings that they have dealt with throughout their lives were symptoms of autism. Many times, the person doesn't know that anything is even wrong. For some, their symptoms didn't fully manifest until their social demands exceeded their ability to cope. These are just ordinary people living their lives. They found ways to work around or mask those behaviors that may make them stand out from the crowd. And as one ages, they may begin to experience changes in their behaviors and interest as they go through different stages of life. What may affect someone in early adulthood, like starting when they're starting a new career, is going to be entirely different than what affects someone in their senior years, like moving into a nursing home. Along with that is the idea that maybe somebody wasn't experiencing symptoms or those symptoms were not so obvious until after a major life event. For example, if somebody is living in their own home, they're free to follow their own routines, to do what they like, when they like, however they like to. Once they move into an LTC, that freedom is now very limited. They can't eat Kraft mac and cheese every day at 5 o'clock now. Dinner's at 5:30, and it's whatever is on the menu at the facility. They no longer have access to most of their personal items or the ability to arrange their life how they want it. They can no longer drive and therefore are unable to take the same route they've taken to the grocery store for the past 20 years. Now they could be experiencing anxiety due to the change in routines and schedules because their normal is no longer their normal. DSM-5 diagnosis includes being classified into 3 levels of severity, which we will explore over the next few slides. Understanding the level at which your client is diagnosed helps you to know what supports are going to be needed from you. Level 1 requires support. Level 2 requires substantial support, and Level 3 requires very substantial support. Someone may have different levels across 2 different domains. A person may have a Level 1 autism diagnosis for social communication and a Level 2 for restrictive repetitive interest or behaviors, and each will have its own level of support. The Level 1 autism requires support. Without supports, the person has trouble with social communication. Maybe they can speak, but they're unable to carry on a conversation without noticeable difficulty. They have difficulty initiating social interactions. The person may appear awkward or uncomfortable in their body language, not showing any interest in social interactions with peers. Transitions can be a very challenging time. Switching between activities can be disruptive to them. Problems organizing and planning can hamper their independence. Level 2 autism, requiring substantial support. The individual will have deficits in verbal and nonverbal communication even when they have those supports. Their social impairments are apparent. Limited, if any, initiation of social interactions, as well as showing no interest in interacting with peers. Inflexible in their behavior. They have more difficulty coping with changes or changing their focus. The restrictive, repetitive behaviors interfere with their daily functioning. And the level 3 autism, requiring very substantial supports. This level requires the most support. The person diagnosed as a level 3 has severe deficits in verbal and nonverbal communication skills, very limited initiation or responses to social interactions with others, and their restricted repetitive bad behaviors markedly interfere with functioning. They will experience distress and will have great difficulty changing focus from one thing to another. Schedules and sameness are vital, and it will be exceptionally challenging for one with a level 3 diagnosis to deal with change. One's diagnosis level, whether level 1, 2, or 3, will determine the severity of the symptoms exhibited. Social communication and interaction are describing how one uses verbal and nonverbal skills to communicate or interact with others, and those unwritten rules of social interaction. For a person with ASD diagnosis, that kind of knowledge must be learned. Someone with autism may have deficits with those social skills and interactions. Some of the traits exhibited may be not making eye contact or looking directly at someone's face when talking or interacting. This can also come across as them not paying attention to the conversation. One might have difficulty holding a conversation with another, engaging in the back and forth. That may be a struggle as well. The person may appear awkward or uncomfortable with their facial expression, body language, or movement and gestures. Along with the communication challenges comes the inability or difficulty to express their wants and needs, which in turn can understandably increase frustration. They don't always respond when their name is called or have a slower response to a verbal prompt or acknowledgement. A person doesn't really show a lot of emotion, good or bad, happy or sad. They don't seem to show much enjoyment or any emotion of objects or activities that are normally fun, like playing a game or watching a funny movie. And it's important that we stick to the schedule and routine. Sameness and routine are vital. It allows one to know what's coming up or what to expect in the future. What are we talking about when we talk about restricted repetitive behaviors? It's defined as behaviors that are limited in their range of focus, interest, or activity, and includes a strong attachment to objects. What does that look like? Well, let's think about babies kicking their legs and flapping their arms as they're learning how to move their limbs and feeling how they move around in the world. Or as an adult, you've been stuck in a waiting room for quite a while now. You're starting to tap your foot, cross and uncross your legs, maybe tapping your fingers, sort of a nervous action. Or you are in that never-ending meeting that you find yourself unconsciously clicking your pen or doodling on your notepad out of boredom or distraction. And think about those diehard Buckeye fans, the ones who never miss a game. They plan their vacations around playoffs and the Rose Bowl. They have all of the gear, t-shirts, bumper stickers, flags hanging around their house, and they will argue against any and every opposing team. All of that is a form of restricted, repetitive behavior. While it is a normal human action, it's also considered a key feature of an autism diagnosis. For someone with autism, those behaviors serve a need. Whether it's rocking, blinking, hand flapping, twisting one's hair, each serves its own purpose. Restricted interests are strong or intense interest in specific topics or objects. One may become fascinated with train schedules, or they're only going to eat certain foods, playing the same song over and over. This includes that need for sameness and routine, to follow the same steps each time. Forming strong attachments to objects is common for someone on the spectrum. Clients may experience high levels of distress when interests, behaviors, or schedule and routines are interrupted or changed, especially without notice. From the National Autism Association, self-stimulatory behavior, also known as stimming, is the repetition of physical movements, sounds, or movement of objects, and is common among individuals with autism. Stimming or stims may include hand flapping, rocking, repeating noises or words, snapping fingers, spinning objects, and jumping, among many, many others. It is often used as a way to calm, stimulate, or express thoughts and feelings. Self-stimulation or stimming is a very common term in the autism community, and it is an example of repetitive behavior. Stimming can look different for every person and can serve a variety of purposes depending on the person, the situation, or what they need in that moment or in general. It can be effective when one is feeling dysregulated, which is any kind of change in behavior that can indicate that a person is having a hard time managing their emotions. It's a coping tool for feeling overwhelmed or just unable to control their emotions at the time. Stimming is not something that should be managed or controlled unless there is a risk of harm. If someone is totally focused on counting their steps as they walk, they're not paying attention to the fact that they're crossing a busy street, so they're not recognizing the danger. So it can affect things in a negative way. Now we're going to talk about myths and facts about autism and those diagnosed with autism. There are so many misconceptions about it, so let's clarify some things. The myth: autism is a childhood diagnosis. The facts: autism can be diagnosed at any age. There are many who haven't received a diagnosis until they are well into adulthood. The myth: autism is caused by vaccines. Facts: there is no scientific evidence to support that theory. In fact, that myth has been disproven. Myth: autism is a disease. The fact: it's a disorder. It's how one's brain works. And the myth: autistic people cannot form relationships, romantic, social, or professional. Fact: while some on the spectrum may struggle to form relationships, that doesn't mean they can't or don't want to. It just means their relationships may look different than what one might expect. Just as many are married with children, have friends, and are successful professionals as are not. And the last myth: all autistic people are nonverbal. That's a stereotype, not true. Understanding the differences between what is a fact and what is a myth can help you be able to better support your clients on the spectrum. Now we're going to watch a brief video about autism and aging.
Autism was first identified in the 1940s and really wasn't widely recognised until the 70s. What we know about older adults with autism is very little, so it's only now that those first diagnosed people are reaching late life that we can begin to look at what happens to people with autism as they age. In the study that is just been published, we've worked with colleagues at the Autism Diagnostic Centre in Southampton, where adults come for a diagnosis of autism. People who are older have more autism traits rather than fewer autism traits. So you may expect that actually, if you've made it to 60 without having a diagnosis of autism, that perhaps you've got milder traits of autism, and that's not what we're seeing in this sample. These people have quite severe autism traits, but they also have quite high cognitive abilities, which may actually help them to compensate. So they may have developed strategies over their lifespan in order to cope with some of the difficulties that they would experience in autism. What we really want to do next is to look at how these people change over time. So there are likely to be differences between somebody who's 20 who's getting a first diagnosis and somebody who's 60 and is getting a first diagnosis. It's really early days for this autism and ageing work, and it's a really exciting time to be working in this field. At the moment in the UK there are 15 million people aged over 60, and that number is going to just continue to grow. I think we all deserve to have the best ageing experience that we can, and it's only by asking these questions that we can begin to put things in place to really help people age as well as possible.
When one is triggered, that means something has disturbed them emotionally, physically, or mentally. There is no specific trigger. It's anything that is disruptive to one's peace of mind. Something small or insignificant to me could be triggering for someone else. Triggers can be anything related to what is going on around the person. Sensory sensitivity is just what it says, being sensitive to certain environments around them. Sensory overload, when one's senses are overwhelmed or overstimulated by environmental factors. Lights are too bright or dim, the room is too noisy and loud. Communication struggles are a very real and understandable source of frustration for someone. Some can't stand the way certain textures or fabrics may feel. They may refuse to wear certain clothing because of the texture. Some can be impacted by certain smells or tastes or textures of certain foods. Being touched or touching another can be challenging as well, and it can be for varying reasons. Avoiding those triggers whenever possible is always going to be best. If it's an environmental trigger, when possible, adjust the environment, try to fix it. Don't offer certain clothing if you're aware that there's a texture issue, or avoid certain foods and smells. There can be difficult outcomes when one is triggered, from meltdowns to shutdowns, which we will discuss more in detail in the next few slides. Sensory issues are unique sensitivities to certain types of stimuli in the environment. Sensory issues can be one of the biggest triggers for a person with autism, especially when it's something that is outside of that person's control. One can be sensitive to any number of things: sight, sound, smells, taste, and/or touch, just to name a few, and everyone's response is unique. Two kinds of sensory sensitivities are being hypersensitive and hyposensitive. Hypersensitive is one is over-responsive to something. The feel of polyester, being stuck in a crowd of people, fluorescent lightings, balloons popping. The response can be feelings of being overwhelmed. In response to those feelings, you may see someone covering their ears or their eyes, or being more active in their movements, like jumping or spinning. Sensory avoidance is what happens when one is trying to avoid those issues. They will avoid certain fabrics of clothing, or they'll pull away from physical touch, or cover their ears or eyes. Hyposensitivity is the opposite. It is when one is under-responsive, and they may seek out those bright lights or loud noises. Someone who experiences hyposensitivity may have trouble recognizing things in themselves, like hunger, illness, and pain. It can also create sensory seeking behavior in order to get more sensory input from their environment by making loud noises or rocking back and forth. Sensory issues can be triggers for those who experience them, often leading to feelings of being overwhelmed or no longer being in control. They can experience sensory overload or a meltdown or a shutdown.
Today you will sit through a simulation of the differences between the lunchroom of a person without autism and a person with autism. We will begin with the person without autism. Notice here that the sounds and lighting are normal. Next will be the person with autism. You will notice that the lighting will be brighter and the sounds will be louder and will blend together. This is what a person with autism could go through every day, however each case is different. Look around and notice the differences between the two simulations.
Meltdown versus a shutdown. Sensory and social overload, unexpected changes, being overwhelmed, feeling shame, guilt, and more can cause autistic people to become dysregulated, often resulting in meltdowns or shutdowns. During a meltdown, you might feel totally out of control. Meltdowns involve yelling, harming ourselves, being aggressive, and repeating behaviors or words. During a shutdown, one might feel like they're in a trance. Shutdown involves retreating, going nonverbal, and turning off social media. Often, meltdowns can turn into a shutdown. Simply put, a meltdown is an intense response to an overwhelming situation when an autistic person is no longer in control of their emotions or physical responses. It can be physical or verbal response, and there can be any number of triggering factors that can cause a meltdown. What happens when someone experiences a meltdown? It can look just like what one thinks a temper tantrum may look like: kicking, hitting, biting, shouting, screaming, and yelling. The fact is that while those physical actions are alike, it could not be more different. The intent behind a meltdown is not a manipulative one. It's not to achieve or get something in return. The person became so dysregulated, so overwhelmed by the situation or the triggers that they lashed out. It's not an intentional behavior, and it's uncontrollable. What could be some more reasons for a meltdown? Well, it could be triggered by a single event or a series of smaller events that just piled up to become too much for one to handle. It may be crying or yelling or self-interest behavior, could be physically destructive to the environment around them by throwing or breaking objects. Or if the person feels threatened or cornered, there may be physical aggression toward anyone who may be in their vicinity. When someone diagnosed with autism becomes overwhelmed or overstimulated, there could be either too much or too little sensory input, and they are unable to get in control of themselves. Depending on the person, it could be sounds, smells, temperature, lighting, or textures causing their anxiety. Changes in schedules or routines can be very challenging. Routine is very important for someone on the spectrum. Social interactions can create stress, especially if that person experiences communication challenges. Imagine how frustrated you would be if you were unable to communicate even your most basic wants and needs. When meltdowns occur, please be aware that this is not the time and place to correct or appease the individual going through the crisis. The role we play is to support the person through the crisis, to help them and anyone else involved stay safe. Shutdown, like a meltdown, is a reaction or response to being triggered. It is an involuntary reaction when an autistic person is feeling overwhelmed. They become completely withdrawn. In some instances, it can appear almost trance-like or even catatonic. They won't respond or react when spoken to because they've reached their breaking point. That person has shut down and they're unable to express everything building up inside of them, unable to regulate their emotions, thoughts, and feelings. They could be experiencing too much stress, be emotionally overloaded. It's just become too much for that person to cope with. There can be too much sensory stimuli or too much going on in the environment. Maybe they're being rushed past their comfort point or against their routine. If one feels cornered, like they don't have an out for a stressful situation, one could shut down. Shutdowns are what happens when a person becomes completely overwhelmed and they've reached that snapping point. But unlike a meltdown where they become physical, loud, and destructive, shutdowns can be more subtle. The person can become withdrawn from the world and become uncommunicative. Individuals experiencing a shutdown may become non-communicative and unresponsive. Shutdowns serve as a coping mechanism, creating a protective emotional and sensory barrier around the person. Rather than expressing intense emotions, individuals internalize stressors by disconnecting from their surroundings. They're closed off without expression. And recognizing the need for personal space and creating a calming environment is essential supporting individuals in a shutdown. Perspective is the way we see things, a point of view. Perspective is unique to the one viewing it. So our next video demonstrates the perspective of someone with autism. And it's important to be open-minded when working with someone on the spectrum. Having even a little understanding of what it's like from their point of view gives you a better idea of what they experience and will allow you to be more empathetic to them. Now let's meet Dawn and hear a little bit about her journey being diagnosed with autism as an adult.
I was going through a horrendous crisis on my own. And it was at that point I got on to Google. I went through every psychological disorder in the book. I kept hopping over while I was going through this. Links that kept coming up to the National Autistic Society, and thinking, yeah, but I'm not autistic, this isn't it. And digging around everything else, and then finally I clicked on it, and there it was. A script of a meltdown and a shutdown staring right back at me. And I was just stunned, absolutely stunned. I printed it off, took it down to my husband, said, this is what it feels like. That is what you are seeing? And he said it was. The day I was diagnosed, I came home and I danced in my living room all by myself. And I was just so grateful. The overpowering emotion I had was gratitude. I always knew who I was, but now I know why I am.
There are many, many ways to be supportive of someone on the spectrum. Now let's talk about some different ways that we can do that. By maintaining a regular schedule or routine, that's a valuable tool supporting adults with ASD. Depending on the level of severity of their diagnosis, a disruption to their schedule can be very distressing. Assisting your client to create or maintain a schedule or routine, and this allows for structure and it fills that need for sameness. It lets them know what to do and what to expect each day. Planning ahead will allow the opportunity to alleviate any stress related to transitions throughout their day. It may be starting their workday or just a day in the LTC and then transitioning into the next part of their day. For example, every day Rose has morning coffee in the dining room. It's her time to think about her upcoming day and take a few minutes to herself. The facility announced there's going to be renovations in the building starting next month, so the main dining room is going to be temporarily closed for about 3 months. In order to assist Rose with that change, you tell her in advance about the renovations. You show her where the alternative dining areas will be during that time. Include Rose in the conversation and in working out a new routine for her morning. Encouraging clients to practice regular self-care, enabling them to focus on their own mental and physical well-being. It can be exercise, healthy eating, journaling, having a spa day, or just a meal with friends. Helping client and residents to learn coping skills for those times when they may be feeling dysregulated or overwhelmed, and then practicing those skills with them to enable clients to use them effectively. The goal being that when they are in an overstimulating or overly stressful situation, the client will eventually be able to identify their feelings and use those practice skills to bring back calm feelings. Role playing with the client can help them to learn how to act or behave in different social situations that they may realistically find themselves in. It could be something as simple as engaging with other residents while having breakfast in the dining room, or practicing self advocacy by making a request of a social worker or a DON. You can help by being patient with your clients who may be on the spectrum. You can use pictures, diagrams, and handouts. Those are a good method in helping one to learn new skills or to retain skills they already have. It gives them something tangible to hold on to, look at, and refer back to if needed. You can create or help them to create their own sensory-friendly space, even if it's just a little corner of their room. Ask what kinds of things will be comforting to them. It may be soft or low lighting, a comfy chair, or maybe a throw and some pillows with different textures or fabrics. Maybe a preferred scent of air freshener or a candle. However it is, it should be calming and comforting to the one that it's meant for. It can sometimes take a minute or two for someone on the spectrum to fully process something being requested of them. And again, a reminder just to be patient. Let the client know it's okay. Take your time. No need to be rushed. No pressure. Reassure them that it's okay to go at their own pace. Being consistent in your words, actions, and means of supporting one on the spectrum. That builds trust and confidence in your relationship with them. If the client doesn't trust or believe you, that's going to be detrimental in your ability to support them. And it's not always a bad thing. When we hear the term or phrase, she's autistic, or he is on the spectrum, for many people, their response is going to be one of pity or sorrow. I am so sorry. Or they react as if they were told the person has an incurable disease. That's not the case. A person with autism is not broken. They don't need us to fix them. And while a diagnosis may be initially upsetting or confusing, the fact is, for many adults, they feel a sense of relief. They finally know why they have felt a certain way during their lifetime. It explains reactions that they've experienced, like meltdowns or shutdowns, the sensitivity to bright lights and crowded spaces. People in the spectrum just have a different thought process. They tend to be and think more factually, very black and white. The number of scientists, engineers, doctors, computer engineers, programmers, and professionals on the spectrum might surprise you, but it shouldn't. Math and science are fact-based. 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. It doesn't change. People on the spectrum make important contributions to society every day. And if you think about it for a minute, every human being needs help at some point in their life, all of us. The only difference between you and someone on the spectrum is what that support or that help might look like. One may need an accommodation for their new job, for example. They need to take a few more smaller breaks throughout their day due to their difficulty of staying focused, being able to stand or sit still for extended periods of time. Those smaller breaks allow them to be successful at their job, to make a living, and to take care of themselves and their family. It's no different than someone in a wheelchair who would need a ramp or an elevator. They need wider doorways, lower countertops, etc., to be able to effectively do their job and make a living. Support is support. It just looks different for everybody, and we all need it. Dr. Temple Grandin is a brilliant scientist, a best-selling author. She has a PhD in animal science and is a college professor, and she is a leading expert and pioneer in the cattle industry. Her ideas, designs, and inventions for that industry are used worldwide to this day. Dr. Grandin is also an international advocate and expert speaker about autism, because Dr. Grandin is autistic. She broke through all the stereotypes and has never let her diagnosis define who she is or what her life would be. Therefore, she brings a unique insight. So let's watch a short clip from Dr. Temple Grandin.
You know, you never get cured of autism. But what you do is you learn better, is you learn more and more things.
Well, I didn't speak until I was 4. Now I have a BA and a master's, and I'm studying for my doctorate.
I can remember the frustration of not being able to talk. I couldn't get my words out. My speech came in gradually, a few words at a time. When I was a little kid, I was very autistic, nonverbal, rocking. You know, that's the kind of kid they just put away in the institution. But I had a speech teacher that worked really hard with me, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of young children getting early intervention. You got a 2-year-old or 3-year-old with no speech, don't wait. High school was absolutely worst part of my life. Teasing, teasing, teasing. I got kicked out of school for throwing a book at a girl, teased me because, you know, teasing really made my life miserable. And the only places I could get away from teasing was the specialized activities. Things like horseback riding, electronics lab, model rocket club. The line was drawn in the sand. I was not allowed to become a recluse in my room. I had to get out and do things. I'm always kind of baffled at just how illogical people are in their thinking. I'm very logical in my thinking. But when I was younger, I didn't know that other people thought more in words. You see, I think in pictures. If I don't have a picture, I don't think. And my mind is very, very associative. Being a visual thinker, I tend to put things into categories. You see, autism is a very big spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, you got half the people at Silicon Valley. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody who's very handicapped, remains nonverbal, is going to have to live in a supervised living situation. Really, really big spectrum. And you know, Einstein probably be labeled autistic today in a lot of school systems because he had no speech until age 3. I'm interested in seeing something that makes real change. I've done a lot of work that's made a lot of improvements in the livestock industry, and I think I've helped a lot of kids succeed. I want to see the kids that are like me succeed. That's the kind of stuff that makes me happy, when I see the things that I do make a difference.
At the end of the day, we want the clients we serve to live happy, healthy, successful lives, to be the best versions of themselves. To do that, we should be able to recognize our clients' or residents' symptoms when they manifest. Having some understanding of how those symptoms affect the people we serve in our facilities will help us to help them. The end goal being to support those on the spectrum, to work with them for their normal, to make them feel safe and comfortable for them being themselves, normalizing their symptoms so they don't feel alone, like they are the only one to ever feel or act this way. Knowing the level of one's diagnosis, level 1, 2, or 3, determines how much support they're going to require from you. Knowing and recognizing a person's specific triggers will help you possibly prevent meltdowns or shutdowns. Using a person-centered approach and recognizing that each person is unique, that what will work for one doesn't work for all. That person-centered approach lets us personalize the way we support clients and residents on the spectrum, keeping our focus on the specific person and their specific wants and needs, and not on their diagnosis. Be proactive by teaching clients and residents coping skills that are effective for them before they need them or are facing a crisis, by avoiding known triggers when at all possible. Listen to your clients. Listen to their input, whether it's verbal, gestural, their facial expression, body language. Utilize active listening when engaging to ensure that you fully hear what it is your client is communicating to you. Thank you for joining us today to talk about supporting adults on the autism spectrum. We hope you can take what we discussed today and are able to apply it successfully at your facility with your physicians. Thank you and have a great day.